His Holiness Bhakti Vijnana Goswami, also known as Dr. Vadim Turnev, who holds a PhD and is director of the Bhaktivedanta Institute in Russia. And today he's going to be presenting on two ways of presenting Krishna consciousness, which are as the science of God or as a religion, and differences in the approaches and consequences of each of those methodologies. So I'll now pass you over and welcome Bhakti Vijnana Goswami. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Akandadi Prabhu. I'm very happy to be a part of this summer school of Bhaktivedanta Institute, and I'm somewhat embarrassed after hearing all these lofty presentations, especially the one from Hridayananda Maharaj. So my presentation will be of more practical nature. Still, I hope it will be relevant for the participants of this school. Basically, the reason why I'm presenting this is that I see the alarming tendency of presenting Krishna consciousness more and more as a religion. We are claiming to be a bona fide religion, and in a zeal to prove this claim, we are kind of betraying the initial premise or foundation upon which Srila Prabhupada found his Krishna consciousness movement. So I'll make some observations which are there about the tendencies, and the main point of this presentation is to show the very dangerous consequences of stressing the religious nature of Krishna consciousness as opposed to the scientific nature of Krishna consciousness, as Prabhupada was claiming. So I'm doing this in connection with the core mission of BI, and let's see how it works. So Srila Prabhupada said to Satsvarup Maharaj, the next phase is yours. You must establish our movement as a genuine scientific movement. And of course, we all know that Srila Prabhupada again and again and again was stressing this point that Krishna consciousness is scientific by nature. And he says the same thing in the letter to Amarendra Prabhu, that this party is our most important preaching arm, which we will be able to destroy the bogus speculation and cheating which goes under the banner of scientific advancement. So he wanted us to present Krishna consciousness as he did, not as a dogma, not as a religious belief, but as a rational science. And basically, if we take any scientific theory, it must be non-dogmatic, rational, and its conclusion should logically follow from several fundamental premises, as Hridayananda Maharaj so beautifully explained, that there should be some axiomatic truths behind any scientific theory, and it has to be able to explain the maximum number of observed phenomena. It should be universally applicable, and Srila Prabhupada, of course, gloriously proved that Krishna consciousness is universally applicable indeed. So it's not some ethnic kind of belief. It should work anytime, anywhere, and it should be experimentally verifiable or falsifiable. So, if we take Krishna consciousness and analyze from these 4 points, we will see that it fits the bill, it fits all the criteria, and Srila Prabhupada specifically stressed that it should be practically applicable and should make the practical changes and should work practically, basically. This is a beautiful quote from his letter. Philosophy is the highest, but even higher than philosophy is practice of philosophy. So he was pointing again and again that it's not just a phase, but it's something which is very practical and provable. As Radhika Raman so beautifully explained, that despite our Shastric grounding, we have a lot of room for empiric investigation. And basically we have to prove that it's true by our own experience, by applying the philosophy. And of course, Srila Prabhupada again and again, that was his very important point. He would say that Krishna consciousness is not dogmatic. Don't think that it is a scripture of Hindus. No, it is for all human beings. There is reason, there is science, there is philosophy. It's not dogmatic. So we can go on and on. We all know this point. We have no dogmatism, Srila Prabhupada says here. If you want to understand this Krishna consciousness on the basis of philosophy, logic, science, we are prepared to present it to you. So that was his way, but again, as I said, we see different tendencies now. The same sort of quote, this is science of the soul, it's not dogmatic. And he says again the same thing in Chaitanya, about Chaitanya Charitamrita. He says, religion often gives rise to dogmatism, but the author of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, Krishnadas Kaviraja, urges us to try to understand Lord Chaitanya and the philosophy of Krishna consciousness according to logic. So that was Srila Prabhupada's presentation, but my initial premise was that we see the transformation of ISKCON into yet another religion. And in one sense, it's a natural process. It goes on, and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he very beautifully explained this, that the idea of an organized church in an intelligible form indeed marks the close of the living spiritual movement. The great ecclesiastical establishments are the dikes and the dams to retain the current that cannot be held by any such contrivances. They indeed indicate a desire on the part of the masses to exploit a spiritual movement for their own purpose. That's a very important point from his essay. They also unmistakably indicate the end of the absolute and unconventional guidance of the bona fide spiritual teacher. So this is a very grave warning, and here Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada explains the reason that the masses are trying to exploit the genuine spiritual movement for their own purpose. So, basically what we see in the beginning when any genuine religion starts, due to the contact of its founder with the spiritual reality, it is a vibrant spiritual movement. Therefore, it attracts genuine seekers of truth and transforms their hearts. Due to their enthusiasm and preaching zeal, gradually many people join the religion, bringing their expectations and hopes. That's where the problem starts. The movement gains recognition and becomes accepted as a bona fide. It is usually considered as a sign of success by the members, but in most cases indicate the demise of genuine spiritual movement. It's basically rephrasing of what Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur says. What we're dealing here is the dynamic of demand creates supply. So what is the demand of the masses of people? The masses of people need salvation. The main motivation of the masses of people is to be saved from the sufferings of this world. And the preachers, consciously or subconsciously, sensing this demand, start assuring people that they can get guaranteed salvation here and only here. You know, we all heard perhaps these sermons from Vyasa sons, which would claim that Krishna consciousness is the only way to be saved and everything else is false. And it is as a result of such presentation, which exploits the fears of people and of course answers their expectations and hopes, people join in masses, and the religion becomes very powerful institution of this world. That's what we see gradually it's happening with ISKCON. But the end result, the consequence of this is very sad. Again, from the same essay of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, the church that has the best chance of survival in this damned world is that of atheism under the convenient guise of theism. So this is what can happen. The churches have always proved the staunchest upholders of the grossest form of worldliness, from which even the worst of non-ecclesiastical criminals are found to recoil. So, and this is what we see, and the next slide explains the difference between the search for truth and the religious approach. You know, for those people who come to a spiritual movement with the need to be saved, with the need of salvation, they just want salvation and they hope for the better future. But of course, Srila Prabhupada didn't address this need. He was addressing people who have tried to find the truth. And the people who are convenient or conventional, religious practitioners, they're ready to pay the price for salvation. Basically, the price for salvation is to adhere to some dogmas and rules, and they're ready to pay it. If the religion promises you that you will be saved, okay, we will do this. But as a result, you get some fake result. You don't really get spiritual transformation. You just get these false promises. Whereas if we take the genuine search for truth, then the price to pay for it is the desire to deepening and increase desire to find the truth, and ultimately you will get something real. So this is perhaps the most important slide in the whole presentation, which shows the difference of religious approach and scientific search for truth. You know, even though externally it may sound similar, we may preach the same, scriptures and say even the same things, more or less. But there is a gulf of difference between these two approaches. Religious approach always stresses that you're already saved. Your salvation is guaranteed. You only should follow certain conditions. In our case, you should chant 16 rounds and not one round more. And you should follow 4 or 3.5 regulative principles, whatever you choose, or perhaps go to Mangalarati or whatever it is. And very important characteristic of this religious approach is that you're making the choice once. You made the choice, you made the right choice, you joined the right place, you joined the right religion, and if you join, you're saved. And if you don't, well, the hell is yours. And behind this approach, there is always the desire to absolve responsibility, the desire to take off the burden of responsibility. Usually people of this kind, they say, just tell me what to do, don't make such complicated philosophy, don't bewilder me, just tell me what to do, I will do it as long as you guarantee my salvation. And of course, spiritual organization and or immature spiritual teachers, they always claim that they will take all responsibility for you if you follow them without questioning. So the completely different approach is that when we treat the spiritual movement as the facilitation for us to find the truth. The spiritual movement gives only one guarantee, that it will help you in your search for truth. The choice is not once. You basically have to make the choice every minute, at least every day, what you choose. You have to be very introspective and to be, responsible for your actions, for your words, for your even thoughts. So we make the choices every day. Our search for truth does not end when we join a religious or spiritual organization. And the person who is of this attitude, he understands that this is my responsibility. I don't have to shift the responsibility to anyone else, and I will not blame anyone for my failure. And I'm free, I'm doing it of my choice, not because somebody else wanted me to do it. And of course, the religious organization or genuine religious or spiritual teacher will not take the whole burden of responsibility for the salvation, quote unquote, of the person upon his shoulders. He will just say that, I'm here to help you, but the result really depends on how correctly you're following the path and how properly you're understanding the science behind it. So this is basically, kind of common sense. We can see the same dynamic in Bhagavad Gita. In the beginning, Arjuna, who is the representative of this sort of beginners in the spiritual science, he just says, in this condition I'm asking you, tell me for certain what is the best for me. Now I'm your disciple and the soul surrendered unto you, please instruct me. So I'm confused, please tell me very clearly and I will follow you. And after speaking Bhagavad Gita, Krishna kind of turns it around and puts the burden of responsibility back upon Arjuna and says, I explained everything to you. I explained all the confidential knowledge. Deliberate on this fully and then do what you wish to do. So this is exactly the difference of the religious approach. And if Krishna was not Krishna, but if he was some of the, gurus of ISKCON, he would say, yes, 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 I will tell you, just follow me and I will save you. But Krishna is saying what he is saying. He is not taking the burden of responsibility. He is placing it back. And of course, Srila Prabhupada was the same. One very important and very grave difference between the religious approach and scientific approach is that religion is emphasizing the result. It always talks about the end result, but the science emphasizes the process. The result is the outcome of the process, and therefore Prabhupada, he was always emphasized the process, that we have to follow the process properly. And therefore he coined this phrase, techniques of spiritual life. He was basically, indicating that we should do some spiritual experiment and enjoy the result of this experiment if we do everything properly. Whereas the religion will always talk about the end result without emphasizing enough the need for practice. So this is a very beautiful quote from Charles Colton. Man will wrangle for religion, write for it, fight for it, die for it, anything but live for it. They will do anything for religion, but not practice religion in reality. And there are so many other differences which we can see. Usually religion is very obsessive about miracles. You need to show the miracles all the time, and if miracles don't happen, religious people, they always concoct some miracles or invent some miracles. Whereas spiritual science emphasizes not the miracles, but the real miracle, the change of the heart. And miracles is just, they may or may not be there, and we know how Prabhupada was very skeptical about miracles. And even though sometimes we hear so many different stories how Prabhupada showed this miracle or that miracle, but as far as Prabhupada himself was concerned, his miracle was the transformation of the heart, which is the real outcome of the scientific approach to Krishna conscious process. Then attitude towards scriptures is also very different. We can see very unsystematic approach towards scriptures in ISKCON very often. If we hear the average lecture, we just see some anecdotes or hear some anecdotes or collection of the stories. Very rarely we see some solid or hear some solid or even systematically given philosophy. Whereas for the spiritual seeker, for the seeker of truth, the scriptures is the source of a different worldview. And to create this worldview, to make this worldview work, you have to work hard, and you have to systematically study the scriptures from beginning to end with understanding of logic and reasoning. And as a result of it, you will become Shastra Chakshu, you will have the eye of Shastra. Very peculiar thing about rules and regulations in religion and in spiritual science. In religion, you will see two different approaches. First, it's usually fanatical following rules for the sake of rules, and then inventing different ways of circumventing restrictions which are not convenient. I heard a beautiful podcast with Noam Chomsky, who was totally disillusioned by the religion, because he says, he explains his anecdote of his life, and he says, from this interaction with the Orthodox Judaic tradition, which always tries to find some loopholes into the religious canons and rules, he said, I understand that religion is based on the assumption that God is an idiot. You always try to kind of cheat God by trying to find the loopholes into the scriptural rules. Whereas the spiritual science means that you understand the meaning of the rules, a rationale behind them, and the ability to discriminate the principles from details, which is so rare nowadays. And And you try to do the concerted efforts to raise the standard of your personal sadhana. Completely different attitude towards religion, towards the saints. If we take religious approach, you will see that all the saints have to be flawless. They're usually nitya siddhas. They just came to save us. And then, if you see some little deviation from the imagined ideal, you become totally disillusioned and start blaming them and tell them, call them names. Whereas spiritual science uses the example of the saints as the source of inspiration. And for the spiritual scientist, for somebody who is searching for truth, the example of a saint is more important, where he is, encountering obstacles and fights with the temptations. Srila Prabhupada gives the example of Bilvamangal Thakur in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Actually, this is Rupa Goswami himself, and he says that this is the source of inspiration. Anyway, so there are so many different, differences, very important differences in approach. And perhaps most relevant for Bhaktivedanta Institute is that usually dogmatic religious practitioners are very afraid of science and condemning science, or adhering to some pseudo science, proving all kinds of strange or trying to prove strange theories, whereas the spiritual science have no fear of engaging in the sensible dialogue with the science and have no problems. And very important difference is that if we are members of religion, we will always openly or or maybe implicitly deprecate other religions and say that they are wrong, and because there is this rivalry. Whereas spiritual science knows that there are universal spiritual principles, and they're reflected in other religion to a certain extent, and we can discern the spiritual principles in other religions. So anyway, I will skip the whole thing. I just want to bring it to conclusion because my time is up. Is that, this is an important. For religious people, the formal initiation is very important. But development, genuine relationship with spiritual master and spiritual teachers are not as important. Whereas for those who are searching for truth, it's much more important to have a genuine relationship by which we gain the knowledge and experience rather than formalities of a particular religion. So what I see in reality, people usually join ISKCON as sincere seekers of truth. But oftentimes they come to our environment and the sincere spiritual seeker is turned into a religious fanatic because of the unhealthy atmosphere and the unhealthy ways of presenting Krishna consciousness in a very dogmatic way. You cannot ask questions, you cannot doubt, just follow this and that. And, we can see this is actually an unfortunate result of all religions. Only 6% of religious practitioners are sincere seekers of truth, and 94 in average are, the masses of people. And therefore, Srila Prabhupada gave a solution which is relevant to Bhaktivedanta Institute and its mission. He says in the letter to Swarup Damodar about Bhaktivedanta Institute in particular, I'm satisfied that you properly understanding the philosophy, and we have introduced the system of examinations, and he says, just consider how to organize this Bhaktivedanta Institute by giving these degrees. You know, what I see, I don't want to make a blanket statement. I'm sure there are nice courses, but I also see that there is more and more courses on Bhakti Shastri, Bhakti Vaibhava, and everything else, which are very dogmatic, which just gives the surface of the Shastra without going deeply. And Bhaktivedanta Institute has to preach to the scientists, but not only to the scientists. The members of Bhaktivedanta Institute have to establish this culture of preaching Krishna consciousness as a science to the devotees. And therefore, Srila Prabhupada again says this, that you know, the Bhaktivedanta Institute is open for everyone, and it's open including those who have already entered our temples. They may also participate in our programs. So the main point of my presentation is that before it's too late, we have to do something, and we have to revive the culture of preaching Krishna consciousness as the science, by understanding it as the science ourselves, without, you know, making it as a, you know, another pseudo religious faith or pseudo religion, which is, as Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada said, is the main fortress of atheism. And that's why Srila Prabhupada said, I'm repeating it again to the members of Bhaktivedanta Institute, the next phase is yours. I finished my preaching, I did what I was supposed to do. Now you take this further, and you preach and establish our movement as a genuine scientific movement, including our members, because what is the use if we try to present Krishna consciousness as the science to everyone else, and our own members don't understand this and make Krishna consciousness into a mockery. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maharaj. Okay, a number of very important and challenging statements and thoughts there. We're now going to invite our other members as a panel. So if the host could arrange, I'm going to introduce Guru Prasad Raghavan, who is now on your screen. He wasn't a speaker today, but he was with us at the Science of Consciousness conference in Tucson, made a wonderful presentation there. He has a PhD in neuroscience and bioengineering from Caltech. He's now the co-founder of the company Yurt AI. So he is the person to understand all the issues of what AI can and cannot do, and has been a long-time collaborator with the Bhaktivedanta Institute for Higher Studies, and I've known him for some years, and he has been highly instrumental in providing us information and direction for the development of the BI, and particularly I'm grateful for his inputs for the Atma paradigm. Are the other members of the panel joining us also? I'm looking to the host of our conference to help them come in. Thank you. We've got Hridayananda Goswami, Bhakti Vijnana Goswami. Is Ramcharita joining us? Possibly not. Well, let's, if he does at some point, we can involve him in the discussion. We've got about half an hour to play with. I'd like, thank you, Ramcharita, thanks for joining us. I'd like to perhaps start on a topic that we've just heard from Bhakti Vijnana Goswami, and asking a little bit more from each of you. how you feel the BI can play a role. It has multiple audiences. Obviously, we have the academic community, we have the general public, we have even our own internal scientists group. But we also have a responsibility perhaps to the general members of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. So how can the BI play a role for helping all of these different audience cohorts in understanding that what is on offer from this movement is a spiritual science? Who would like to go first? Maybe I'll go to Hridayananda Maharaj and ask you if you'd like to comment on that question.
I was hoping to go last, actually, but I'd like to hear from the others. I thought the topic, I mean, what you said is not that different, but the idea of the necessity of, okay, well, I'll offer a few words since you called on me. I think it would be good to identify different tasks that we have. For example, what I focused on today was just sort of general arguments from the field of epistemology in terms of physical and metaphysical epistemologies, and which I think are important and true in a sense, regardless of our philosophy. But I know Ramcharita, he presented a sort of a more precise way of understanding, at least sort of showed an example of a more precise way of understanding our specific theology. And so that I see the importance of that, because ultimately we have to also explain what our specific views are. And our presentation has to be really more precise. An example of that was, although he's not here right now, Radhika Raman, who's talking about pramanas, different forms of evidence. So in a, let's say in a serious philosophy of religion context or philosophical theology context, just to say that, Krishna is God, or another example is to say that, let's say our philosophy is ontology is beta, there's difference and non-difference. And of course, as Ramcharita always points out, those terms are problematic unless you get much more specific about it. So I think it's a question of different audiences and, different purposes. I know one time I was with Prabhupada, and he was engaged in what have come to be called the life comes from life talks, when he was attacking the notion that life can come from dead matter. And I remember that someone asked him about Krishna, and he didn't want to talk about Krishna until he first presented a refutation of the materialistic view. So I personally have identified several, you call them battlefields, or several crucial areas in which we have to have a voice. One is because, in every age, I would say in every age, there's something which you could call sort of the sociology of knowledge equivalent of Vedanta. 1,000 years ago, at the time of Ramanuja, and even earlier Shankara, and responding to Shankara. And then, of course, Madhvacharya, who I think is less perhaps relevant to us than Ramanuja. But these were key points. But again, the discussion, the debate in India at that time among the most serious, you could say, philosophers or intellectuals, it was based on coming up with a correct understanding of the Upanishads, which is, Vedanta, ultimately the Prasthana Traya, these three, literally Prasthana, points of departure. For the Upanishads, you have the Upanishads, what do they mean? Because that's the Jnana Kanda, that's the knowledge portion of the Vedas. So if someone is claiming to have knowledge, they have to show that their notion of knowledge is consistent with the knowledge portion of the Vedas, the Jnana Kanda. So you have the Upanishads themselves, the sort of very esoteric, condensed commentary, which is Brahma Sutras. Then you have the Bhagavad Gita. Nowadays, there's nothing like a consensus in the world that, well, the knowledge is in the Upanishads. We just have to figure out what the Upanishads mean. I mean, there's nothing like a consensus. And so therefore, the battlefield or the area of Vedanta, which you could translate even as the sort of like the highest point of debate or discussion about what constitutes knowledge, in a sense, it's because the world has become degraded and there's no consensus. I mean, there was never a consensus about the Upanishads outside of India, but now everything has been thrown into doubt. And so I mentioned this in my talk, like every philosophical community, and by that I just mean people of some understanding of philosophy and talk to each other and are interested in communicating with each other. So every philosophical community has to have a starting point, just like every problem in geometry, what's given. And so the given in any community of philosophy is just what everyone agrees on. What everyone agrees on depends on their level of understanding, their level of realization. Like, do they understand there's a God? Do they dispute the idea? Do they accept the world as real? Do they dispute that? Do they, and so on and so forth. So I would say that the level of consensus, which is the sort of epistemic starting point, the foundational starting point, is very low. Because the world has become so materialistic. It's a very low point. And so just to finish up, I'm going on and on. So I think there are 5 areas where we have to engage. One is, you say, cosmogenesis. How did the universe get here? Another one is, I would call it biogenesis. How do you get the first life forms? And then once you have life forms, another battlefield is what do you call it? Evolutionary biology. Then there's the mind-body problem, which has become extremely important. And I mean, you could also include perhaps the debate over God. Is the notion of God coherent? Are there coherent ideas of God that somehow fit whatever else we now think or believe we know?
Those are good topics and part of the BI agenda. Guru Prasad, taking this point that Maharaj is saying that previously there was an agreed kind of starting point. Would you say, from your experience working at Caltech and working in the world in AI, that most people take current scientific theories as being the given, and that everything has to then conform with the interpretations that are given to them?
Thank you, Bruce. First of all, I'm very, very excited to be in such an august presence. I've never actually been with such people and communicating on an equal platform. So it's really awesome. Really happy to be here. So on the note of, I think what Maharaj mentioned earlier and what you've alluded to, I think it's definitely the scientific community believes that yes, the things that have stood the test of time could be 100 years, papers or research that has happened. Those are things that we're going to ground ourselves on, and it's very hard to break those notions or get away from those notions. For instance, either more than Darwin's theory, it's about like the development of the DNA as a blueprint, for instance, in the 1960s, and now that's become such a core tenet that no one's going to suddenly, like, it's very difficult to change dogmas in science. And we actually call it the central dogma of, they say DNA to RNA to protein. That's like the dogma. And then afterwards, when you say, and that's like the basis of how life functions. So we are definitely playing a very different game than our preceptors, our great philosophers in 1000 AD, because there was something that they all believed and accepted as, okay, so here's our source of truth, and we have now interpreted this differently. Right now, we don't even have a commonly agreeing source of truth. Our source of truth in the scientific community is like classic papers, but then in the philosophical field, many people don't even probably have access, or they don't even bother with reading those texts as well. So there's like, we're basically shooting arrows, but no one's actually knowing where we need to how do we find this common corpus of text that we can all agree upon? If we crack this, we will be able to like agree to disagree on certain aspects. I think that's where a lot of the challenges, because and every scientist is nuanced in their own way. Like especially like now we have so many silos. We have evolutionary biology, like Maharaj mentioning, if evolutionary biology where there are a gazillion theories. And although we know like in the spiritual community, we speak about certain kinds of theories, but then the field, if you look at the latest review in evolutionary biology, it's there's a modification to how they're also thinking about evolution, how evolution happened, and how genetic diversity happens. Then there's mind-body interface itself, which is a lot of there's a huge silo of scientists who do not even accept that the mind exists beyond the brain. It's everything is just matter at that point, and even proving or trying to kind of prod in that direction is something that we would have to first we need to agree upon. These are the experiments that are, first of all, I agree with as a and two different scientists have to agree upon these experiments are well thought of, reproducible. That's the starting point. Then we can actually argue upon, okay, what do we interpret from the evidence that we see from this experiment? But a lot of times there's even those things might not have, we may not have common ground right there. So it is a very it's an interesting problem that we need to kind of address on that front.
Now, could this be addressed by researchers, academic scholars, all being clearer on what their commitments are? Because each researcher is coming at an issue or a challenge or a problem or a question from the position of their belief commitments, that they accept certain things as fundamental or valid, and they're going to build up their understanding from that. Ricardo, is that something that comes into the sort of project that you're working on, where you're actually dealing with much more esoteric aspects of the nature of God and cosmic consciousness?
Yeah, in a way, I would say yes, but I think everything has to do with, as I tried to point out in my presentation, has to do with the public and the audience, the target audience. And in philosophy, I mean, it's nowadays, it's easier to deal with these issues because we have this field, philosophy of religion, and is an interdisciplinary field. In philosophy of religion, there are philosophy of mind issues, ontological issues, epistemological issues, and so on and so forth. So we have a kind of freedom to deal with. Of course, we have to be rigorous in terms of the concept that we use, in terms of the arguments we give, and so on and so forth. But as far as the themes are concerned, we have more freedom. I would say that things are a bit different when we deal with another fields, like scientific fields. Of course, I would say that religious studies, it's even easier than in philosophy. I mean, to deal with like concepts like God and heaven and soul, whatever. But I think that seems to be the main concern of the PI science, right? And I would say that it's harder, and because we are trying to mix science with the religion in a sense, because of course our worldview is a theistic worldview. And referring to your question, the first question you posed before start speaking about how the PI can fulfill its goal. I just point out the following. It's so hard. I mean, if you take a PhD, for instance, you have to start for 4 years just to know well a research field. And of course, this is required if you want to be like to give a real contribution, and we want to be taken seriously, right? So I would say that in one sense, it's just my view, the PI has a quite broad scope. I mean, it deals with so many stuff, but to be taken seriously in any field, I mean, it takes time. And of course, there is one good side. If you're and are addressing like the public audience, the devotees, and so many different science and philosophy and theology. That's wonderful. However, again, in order to be taken seriously in any field, it requires hard work. It's really hard. So I would say that as an advice, as a piece of advice, pick 1, 2, 3 fields, and within those fields, try to pick 1 or 2 questions, because there's a very big specialization. Any field has subfields and subfields, and within those fields there are so many different questions. And when we were talking about like academic work, people, they work like for 20 years just in one of those specific issues. So I would say keep like trying to do this general work, but at the same time, like choose 1 or 2 specific topics within specific fields, and in this way try to be relevant within those fields.
I would like, if I could respond just for a second to both the speakers, because I'd like to present a different view. I mean, not in opposition. I don't disagree with anything that you said, Ramcharita, and I don't agree with anything that certainly the Guru Prasad Raghavan. I put a quote in chat right now, which I'm going to read to you, which I just found in a second. It said, Carl Sagan, himself worried about opinion polls showing that only about 10% of Americans believe in a strictly materialistic evolutionary process. And as Lewontin's, whoever he is, anecdote concedes, some of the doubters have advanced degrees in the relevant sciences. Dissent, as widespread as that, must rest on something less easily remedied than mere ignorance of facts. And so I, as a student of history, I think that, I agree with that approach that Ramcharita, but I also think that process is going to take forever. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, but there's another view. If you look at history, let's focus in, for example, on the 18th century. And especially as we get toward the end of the 18th century, where you had the Western universities controlled by the church, basically. And at the same time, all of the most important intellectual activity was going on outside the church. Certainly the field of philosophy, the whole age of enlightenment and the Enlightenment project and all that. And so I think that technique of, let's say, really burrowing in, really narrowing down to a very technical field, what I'm thinking, I think there's 2 things you have to look at. One is, how do we get directly influence in the universities? How do we publish papers and referee journals? But there's another thing, and that is, what are the mechanisms of history? Like if you look at intellectual revolutions as a historian, what you find is that the universities often are very much subject to what's going on outside the university. And so I'm not against what Ramcharita said. I think that's part of it, but I also think that by making the case to the reading public, or let's say to people who are not just rednecks, like intelligent people, when you start to create a powerful consensus or view, it actually changes academia also. And I won't go into all the details of how history functions, but it's true. So I think the exclusive focus on becoming respectable in universities and publishing papers and referee journals. I know in the humanities, only I think 10% of articles published in referee journals are even quoted one time, or 80% are never quoted, or something like that. So I know myself, I want to take my case to reasonably intelligent people and create sort of a socio-historical pressure. And ultimately, I think that's something we can do immediately. It's something that allows us not to get lost in the technicalities, because you can dedicate your whole life, as Ramcharita said, on very, very narrow technical points. And ultimately, the people you're influencing or trying to influence die, and the people that replace them may just have completely different issues. And you can achieve these little victories, but hardly anyone in the world knows or cares that you did. So like I said, 90% of the people in America actually don't buy the nonsense of just, totally physicalist evolution. I mean, very few people do. I've hardly met anyone that does. And I travel around and lecture. So I think that in order to come up with the BI strategy, I mean, I agree with Ramcharita. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. I'm just saying, though, that we have to have a sophisticated knowledge of the socio-historical methods by which knowledge disseminates and how societies actually change. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, thank you. Bhakti Vijnana Maharaj, perhaps you started.
Bhakti Vijnana, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Perhaps you started this discussion. Have you any specific hopes for the BI in terms of creating this kind of broader understanding within the public of a need for a spiritual science, or at least a science of the nature of our spiritual existence as conscious?
Or balance, or I would say just balancing physics and metaphysics.
What I see as a need of an hour is that we have, I see a very strange culture which is developing more or less spontaneously. There is no systematic approach to our scriptures. There is no understanding of scriptures from the logical point of view. And I think we should revive the training, especially of the preachers. And usually, preachers who are presenting Krishna consciousness to the outside world or inside audiences, they're not trained themselves. They just have some charisma, they have some, ability to speak and to convince people. So I think the mission of BI has to bring this culture of scientific discourse into the circles of inside the society, especially among the preachers, because the culture which we have now is just to have some quotes, some Sanskrit verses, and some stories in between, and to make people laugh and get dakshina as a result. So,
Brutally frank.
For the last part of our discussion, I wanted to kind of develop what you're just saying, Maharaj, and really look at why we have actually set up this particular session on Shastra, hermeneutics, epistemology, understanding the philosophy of science. And many of our listeners and attendees may be feeling that we haven't focused that much on specific scientific topics, but we're trying to understand how to appreciate our own kind of sources of knowledge, and at the same time, the pratyakshana and anumana by which we're under and experiencing the world. So could I ask each of you now just to kind of speak a little bit about the role of epistemology, particularly we heard from Radhika Raman about the three pramanas of pratyaksha, anumana, and shabda, and the way that they relate to one another, and the way that in our, if you like, progress in the spiritual science, how we would relate to those three, and particularly how are we to cope with issues within our Shastra that we might find challenging, difficult to reconcile in our minds. So if I could have comments from each of you on that topic, that would be very helpful. Who would like to go first?
I can start if more senior people will allow me. According to Jiva Goswami, his definition of Shabda is Vaidusha Pratyaksha. He says Shabda is actually the Pratyaksha or experience, real life experience of Vaidusha, of the people who are realized. So, if we understand that Shastra is not just a revelation which was revealed to somebody, and if we understand that Shabda Pramana means that this revelation has to become my revelation. Sometimes I think we have a wrong approach that Shabda Pramana means that I study, the revealed truths, and by studying theoretically the revealed truths, I kind of also become a part of it. But in reality, it has to become my experience. So Shabda has to become my experience because it is the experience of great people, and it hints in which direction I have to go in my own search for truth. So as Radhika Raman Prabhu said, that actually Pratyaksha has a very important role. We should not think that Shabda is just dogma. When we treat Shabda as a dogma, as a set of dogmas which we have to remember, memorize, and repeat every, Sunday or whatever, then we're just, we're not serving the truth. So my opinion is that we have to stress this point that we have to realize Shabda, we have to, yes, some of the parts of our scriptures perhaps we will never realize, but at least we have to sincerely attempt to practice this and to, as much as possible, to prove by our own experience that this is true, not just be satisfied that it is said by some great people and written in some great books of the past.
Thank you very much. Any others like to come in on this?
Yeah, perhaps I might say one or two words. Well, about epistemology, and perhaps I could refer to a very key philosophical term, which is first philosophy. For instance, Descartes dialogues, they were called dialogues on the first philosophy. And very quickly, in the beginning, first philosophy was more or less ontology. Then, starting from with Descartes, it was replaced by epistemology. And then in 20th century, it was replaced by philosophy of language. Why I'm saying that? Because, of course, communicating and being taken seriously by scientists or wherever requires language. We use language. So I sometimes, as an academic, I have a hard time to understand precisely some of our principles or dogmas. So what I mean to say is, in my view, we need to come with more clear descriptions of our theology. And I think this should come first before we talk about ways to validate Shabda or ways to validate what is said in our scriptures. We have to try to say more clearly what our scriptures say. And this is a kind of reconstruction job or trying, and of course, Christian philosophers and theologians, they did that for centuries. And if we want to communicate, if we want to present our philosophy, theology to others, and to scientists, or in a scientific way or in an academic way, we should to ourselves present our theology in I can give many examples of why this is needed. But I think language, in this sense, should precede epistemology, and even
if I could respond to that, as you know, I would, because we have very different views of Wittgenstein. I agree, of course. Obviously, the call for clear, precise language, who could disagree with that? At the same time, I think that again, it can be, it's necessary. You just published a paper, which is very good, trying to be very precise about what our theology is, exactly what our conception of God is. At the same time, I wonder like how many people are listening. And so I guess the way I was trained by Prabhupada, and maybe my own nature, is I'm very concerned with actually changing history. I don't want to say I'm like Marx in that way, because I'm kind of afraid of resembling Marx in any way. But the notion that that we actually have to change history, and so to me the question is, how should I put it? When I get very technical about our philosophy, exactly what do we mean by God, exactly, and getting, and I think the emphasis on language in the 20th century in Western philosophy was exaggerated and became counterproductive. That's my view. I'm more the Thomas Reid type person, sort of like common sense philosophy. Thomas Reid was one of the famous persons that responded to Hume and thought Hume was kind of nonsensical, David Hume. But so as far as what should we focus on now, is it language, is it ontology? I think it's all historically situated. There has to be a definition of a task because, for example, 1,000 years ago in India or 500 years ago in India, they were very serious intellectuals, theologians, philosophers were very concerned about certain technical things that don't mean anything to us today. And so the fact, I think that to me, the degeneration from ontology to epistemology to language, to me, in a sense, it represents not progress in philosophy, as we've discussed before. To some extent, I mean, not absolutely, but to some extent, I think it's a degeneration. It's a disintegration of philosophy. And again, the consensus of what we can all agree on is just going lower and lower and lower and lower. And it's not that, wow, before Wittgenstein, no one realized when you talk about language. I think before Wittgenstein, a lot of people had much more common sense. And that's why we didn't talk about it, not because they hadn't discovered how important language is. Then one thing I wanted to say about, Ron, sorry, I'll go on like this, I'm sure, for decades.
If possible, I'd like to respond just a very short.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, sure.
Very short. I'm not talking about technicality, not at all, because different groups will require different degrees of language precision, so to speak. However, I argue that some degree of precision should be there. And I give an example. For instance, if we're talking to like an intelligent person, we're trying to explain our Bida, which is the key, perhaps, the key aspect of our theology, right? And if it's the person is intelligent enough, perhaps he or she would ask something like that. But you are saying that it's different and non-different at the same time, or it's different and non-different senses. Or sense, sorry, and if so, what is the difference between those two different?
Okay. If I can respond to that, yeah.
So my point is, we should, even though we might not give those details to everyone, we should be ready to give them if it is needed.
Okay, but in response, I probably, in my illustrious career of harassing people, preaching, I've probably explained beta, I'm sure thousands of times, and I swear to God, I can't remember a single time that someone said that doesn't make any sense to me. I've given Prabhupada I'm sure if I explained it to sophisticated philosophers, we'd go on for 50 years arguing about it. But in terms of normal people and even normal educated people, I'm sure I presented it thousands of times. I can't think of one instance where someone said to me, that doesn't make sense, or what do you mean qualitatively, like Prabhupada saying qualitatively one, quantitatively different, I can't remember ever in my life that someone had a problem with that. So again, I think if we just try to convince these sophisticated, I would say almost like obsessively problematizing philosophers, we're going to die long before we convince them, and the world won't be really benefited. In the meantime, I think there are tens, or if not, tens of or hundreds of millions of people out there who actually are open to a common sense explanation. So again, if you know that, Thomas Reid and Hume, it's I think that we have to know enough philosophy to be intelligent, to reply, but the revolution is really not in the academy. Right now, the academy is under this heavy, heavy criticism because of its, for one thing, because of its very leftist political agenda. But I think we have to be sensitive to the history of knowledge. In other words, where the power centers. And right now, I think the revolution is not just convincing a few elite intellectuals that hold positions in departments, because they'll die before they have any real influence. And so I think we have to be intelligent, sophisticated sufficiently, but bring the message. And just one last thing, and I promise I'll stop. And that is Bhakti Vijnana, my good old friend Bhakti Vijnana, said that we have to revive learning. You know, if only ISKCON history were that good that we'd had something to revive. Because even when Prabhupada was here, I remember in my presence, he would always complain that his disciples didn't even read his books, which are obviously not academic. And so to say there was a golden age of ISKCON where devotees actually read books, I mean, if only. I think we really have to do something new now and create a true learned Brahmin class, which has never existed in the Hare Krishna movement.
All right, I'm going to move to Guru Prasad, who's very patiently had his hand
Very
up.
patient.
So thank you so much, Prabhu. So I have quickly 3 comments to make. One is, I think, reflecting on one of the points that Hriday Maharaj mentioned was, if we go into a topic and if the goal is to write papers, there are plenty of papers out here, right? But if you think about why is evolutionary theory so famous right now? And I believe, this is my understanding, not a single person who actually speaks about evolutionary theory, like I would say not just common men, but even intellectuals, they don't read papers to actually come to that conclusion. They've read Selfish Gene, they've read Richard Dawkins. So they've read these writers who've kind of propagated a very interesting idea and theory out there. And it's become one of the, so I think that's another way to capture, I would say, if you want to bring it out to the masses in some ways, if you want to bring out some ideas and concepts, it's not just paper writing, but it is also about how do we actually set the storyline given, that's one way, like looking at Richard Dawkins, at least I'm seeing parallels there. The other thing I just wanted to say was, regarding the question itself about Pratyaksha, Anumana, and Shabda, it seems science struggles with subjectivity. We don't know how to deal with it. That's the honest problem, because feelings, emotions, revelations, all of these are just, I don't know what it means, because we all have an experience and no one's denying that. But my experience is very different from yours. So I love what Bhakti Vijnana Maharaj mentioned about how Shabda is actually Vaidurshya Pratyaksha. It's such a beautiful thing. But then again, my scientific head is like, how do I ever know what Maharaj felt and what I'm feeling? Like, there's no way to compare those things. So if I can't compare them, and if there's no third party who can actually empirically validate that, that means it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't exist. So we cannot actually come to a conclusion. We can't speak about it. Of course, the question, then I think, to tie that with what Hriday Maharaj and Ricardo Prabhu said was, we maybe need to have some threads that we can kind of sync on. What are those things, that commonalities that we can kind of speak about? I think that's where we need to kind of develop a framework. So, as devotees, as community, as people in the community, we can actually speak about these things without having those biases of, oh, if I don't feel this way, I'm not there. And I think those are other stress points that we also feel within the community, is what my opinion is. But yes, that's thank you for giving me the
Thank
chance.
you very much. I think it's very clear, and it has been clear to the BI that we have different audiences identified as 4, as I mentioned earlier, and that we may need different approaches and different degrees of precision or broadness in dealing with each of those to be successful. We now have to finish. I'm afraid we've run out of time, and it's a shame when we've got such a great panel here today. We could go on all night, but I am going to ask you, in the typical mood of a panel host, to now give one sentence, and I'm serious, one sentence. If I hear anything that sounds like a full stop, we move on. One sentence which you would like to offer as a takeaway from today's session. for the audience. What would you like the attendees today to take away from the session and the things that they've heard in the last 3 hours?
I'll go last. That was my sentence.
You're finished.
Okay, that's mine. Try to think hardly about the issues that bother you from an intellectual point of view.
Sorry, could you repeat that? I think I interrupted you at the beginning.
Oh, sure. Just try to think hard about the theological issues that bother you. I mean, perhaps we won't have an answer, but thinking, it's worth it.
That's great. Thank you. Bhakti Vijnana Maharaj.
Well, Krishna consciousness is a great science, and we should try hard not to bring it down to the level of ordinary religion.
Thank you. Guru Prasad.
This is hard. Maybe give me a few moments. I'd let Maharaj. I mean, Radhan Maharaj is much better at this.
Maharaj.
Me, Kandidi?
Yes, please.
In the spirit of Prabhupada, I think we should be rigorous. We should do really important work, but we always have to have one eye on the fate of the world and follow Prabhupada in the sense of being learned, making cogent arguments, and all that in a way which takes into account the real sociology and historical reality of the transmission of knowledge, and not just become frivolous and satisfy our own intellectual curiosity. Full stop.
Thank you. Guru Prasad, I'm afraid I'm back to you.
Yes. I think the main takeaway for me is, or for all of us could be, trying to blend what we have in science, or the way we understand today's academic science, and theology as we have it is a very hard problem. And I think one needs to finally rely on, there is a lot of experience, and there's a lot of, it's a very nuanced topic. We should not try to artificially combine both of them. And there are parallels to be drawn, but one should not just force one-to-one comparison between academic science and what we have in theology.
Thank you very much.
Hey, Candida, you want to take a shot?
Take away from this? Oh, I think I very much appreciated the different views that we've had today, and what we've wanted to, I think, convey is that we each have to develop our own realizations, and we have to be very careful not thinking that the way I read Shastra means that I have actually understood it in truth, but to ensure that I explore these topics in the association of others. I think it's so important to hear the perspectives, the insights, and understandings that others have got from their study of Shastra and of science, and how that works together to give us an understanding of what this world is actually about. There is a verse in the 11th canto, and Maharaj, you will know it because you helped praise the translation, in the 28th chapter, which says that by all our pratyaksha, by all our anumana, by all our shabda, understanding of shabda, and also by our own internal realizations, we should come to know that this universe is asat. That's ultimately the conclusion. It's not a question of does it work like this, or which theory works or is valid or true. All of that is up for grabs. but ultimately all of our ways of knowing this world is to help us understand that it is temporary, and because it is temporary, it has a cause, and that we are beyond the temporary material world.
Therefore,
with
we need
that-
to work spiritually. Yes.
So now let me do a little promotion for next week. We continue with the summer school on Saturday, same time, and on Sunday also at the same time that we did today. On Saturday, we are covering the science, and particularly the life sciences of the Srimad Bhagavatam. We've got some very good, very interesting sessions on that, which will include a little bit more on the hermeneutic approach, consciousness-based life and speciation, the research that has been carried out on the effects of chanting the Mahamantra, natural and artificial intelligence and modeling, and Guru Prasad, who's with us today, will be speaking on that. And then sessions on Indic archaeology and Vedic archaeology with Rita Jenny and also Michael Cremo, Karmavu. And rounding it off for the day will be our own Murli Gopal Das Mauricio Garrido speaking on his new publication, Krishna and the Quark. On Sunday, it's cosmology and a little look at how you can all become involved in the BI network. So on the cosmology side, we'll be looking at a consciousness-based universe with Giridhari Das, cosmogenesis, what happens before this universe happened, and the insights of the Bhagavatam on that. Some new ideas from Doug Watson and Laura Dominique. And we'll hear more about the BI in Russia. There will be an overview of some of the work that the Institute of Science and Philosophy in India are doing. We'll hear about the Science Museum of the Vedic Planetarium and the project there, which includes also the ideas and the development of the Chandelier project for the Temple of Vedic Planetarium. And we'll have a little panel just to tidy up everything and talk about the BI network, its resources, and the opportunities for everyone to become very deeply involved within it. Because ultimately, that is our hope for this summer school, to make the resources, the projects, the association that the Bhaktivedanta Institute can offer you to help each of us make further progress in the spiritual science. So with that, I thank you all very much and thank the team behind the scenes doing all the technical work and the promotion. They've done brilliantly today. And thank you to all our panelists and presenters for today. I hope that we have not committed any offenses or caused any problems.